Now I would like to welcome to our next presenter. If I'm pronouncing correctly, Jeroen Van Vaerenbergh.
Yeah,
I've tried
something
the
like
best.
that.
Okay, welcome.
Hi.
Welcome. Jeroen is our food archaeologist. Actually, I would like very briefly to tell that your presentation will be about getting local entrepreneurs toward memorable heritage such as gastronomic heritage. The title of the presentation is Mouth and Eye Opening Gastronomic Heritage Interpretation. Entrepreneurs become heritage ambassadors. I'm very eager to hear about your presentation because I also make some replicas of ancient Roman food, for example. At least I've tried. I've tried. So please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. This is Belgium calling. Let's start that way. And I will try to share my screen with you. Yeah, I think you can see it now. Okay. I will put it on full screen. So, hi, I'm Jeroen, the food archaeologist. And as an archaeologist, I'm fed up with reburying archaeological stories in dusty depots. And I can say this as an archaeologist, very boring reports. And I tell the story of the daily survival of our ancestors by the way they were using their food, by the way they were connected to food. A story that is sustainable and even more relevant and present than ever. And I saw on the presentation of the Scottish colleagues, ancient knowledge is future wisdom. That's the thing I'm telling about now today. In short, I cook freshly from the cesspool, the archaeological cesspool, directly on your plate. When you want to see a lot of my my projects, you can go to my website later on. I will share my my link. I noticed a couple of years ago that when food tasting is involved, 80% of attention is guaranteed, and even more, 90% when it's for free. And that way, it's a grateful subject to start from as an heritage interpreter. So I don't do this alone. I work together with chefs, producers, craftsmen of food stuff, designers, and even theater makers. And especially interesting is the co-creation with experimental chefs, like this example from the city of Mechelen in the beginning of 16th century, the place to be in Northwestern Europe. The young Emperor Charles V was raised over there, and even Anne Boleyn, the later wife of Henry VIII, had her first education over there. So place to be at that moment, and a lot of 16th cesspools were investigated by colleagues of me. I was asked by a local museum of contemporary art to recreate experimental dinners with Maarten, a local experimental chef, starting from the ingredients from the cesspools. And at the benefit dinners, I was a sort of a food sommelier who gave meaning to all the dishes which were served. And this led to very interesting exchange of stories with the people at the table, and even led to an opening banquet when the new art center was opened, on which food of that period was served, but in a very contemporary way. So we spooned in literally ancient heritage by new creative gastronomic creations. So what I do is a lot of inspiring local chefs with ancient tastes for new creations. And then there was 2020, start of, oh my God, Van Eyck was here. And maybe the technician can start now a video if it's not too difficult. Otherwise, I just go further with it. Yeah, maybe it's, yeah, okay. Thank you. I probably again have to share my presentation. I have to start again all over, I see. So we go further. Yeah, there it's back. A very, important event in which I was connected to by the city of Ghent. It was a festive year to honor the 15th century painter Jan van Eyck, and he's looking together with us behind me. You see him behind my shoulder. He's looking to my presentation now. So you all know probably the famous Ghent altarpiece of the Mystic Lamb, a majestical polyptych with a turbulent history, but full of detailed, recognizable, edible plants and fruits, painted, like you see over here, pomegranate or sweet-scented woodruff, all used in food of the 15th century, and especially in Ghent, at that time the second largest city of northwestern Europe, after Paris. So full of local and imported foods, and it resulted in sort of a food magazine named Smakelijk. It's a pun intended. You see a connection to the name of Van Eyck. Smakelijk means enjoy your meal in English. And per month of the year, at a two-page story of a change of food ways in the 15th century were discussed during the year. You see over here, and I will put the link to the English version later on in the chat, so you can look into it. An experimental chef of Ghent translated those monthly provisions and ingredients from the pantry of the 15th century in 25 creative contemporary recipes. And this food magazine was promoted by the city of Ghent together with the influencer chef Olly Keulenaar to local hospitality and producers of foodstuff. In early spring 2020, 35 places to eat and to drink. You could get in touch with the Mystic Lamb. So gastronomy was created, cocktails were shaken, sausages were smoked, jams were stirred, and even chocolate was scented with 15th century flavors. Jan van Eyck beer was brewed, bread was baked, and in the shops were filled with old tastes in new jars, let's say. And even the tourist traps had to follow because of the great dynamic around it at the beginning of that year. But then evening fell, darkness came as over all the world, tables were cleared, expositions were closed, museums were closed, and events were cancelled. Yeah, we all know what happened. But what still stayed were the food products. They stayed very relevant, and the city of Ghent created, even together with all the design stuff of that moment, sort of a platform in the so-called Van Eyck shop, where every product was clustered on one retail point. And it even got incorporated in a sort of a tourist tour, where you could taste with all your senses the painting of the mystic lamp of Jan van Eyck. Dus it didn't die away with the beginning of COVID. And then I come to how can heritage interpretation help to create sustainable tourism rooted in local soil. And I use for this nice diagram of Travel to Tomorrow, of Visit Flanders. You can find it online, very interesting publication also. And you see that there are 3 actors that are needed to create a flourishing community, to create a flourishing, sustainable destination. And we will focus on the entrepreneurs. How can they become real placemakers? How can they become real ambassadors for the taste of the place? Let's call it that way. And when I did the Van Eyck project on the gastronomy of the painting, I noticed a couple of things. There were 3 actors that made it possible. The first was the organizer, the city of Ghent, and especially the Department of Culture, on which a lot of very motivated people were really building up a strategy and a vision behind it, and had to push the whole and produce the whole project forward. Then there was the heritage interpreter. That was my task as the food archaeologist. And very important also, because I don't have a real connection, I don't live in Ghent, was a local influencer. That was then the experimental chef Olly Keulenaar I told you about a couple of slides ago. I got a couple of tools for you to point you to what are the things you have to keep in mind when you do such a big project to incorporate a real co-creation with entrepreneurs. And first, there is a personal approach based on equality. That's very, very necessary, the equality. I wrote down also who needs experts, and especially bureaucrats or administrators. All the total project is built on trust. And all the producers and people in hospitality told us that it was the first time they didn't feel that it was top down pushed on them. They were really in charge, and at first we had to be, as organizers, as food interpreters, be an interested customer in their shop, and really try to connect with them, just starting from the things they were making. So as a heritage interpreter, in this case supported by the local influencers, there were a couple of things that were very necessary in the co-creation, and especially interesting was starting from the ingredients and not from the recipe or things like that. Ingredients are much more involve much more creativity, and is a very nice starting point to talk much more than a 15th century recipe or something like that. Personal refinement of what's already there. Just look what they already have. You don't have to create something new. You can put a new story of all things on some products they already have in their shop. And especially interesting was learn from each other. It's a sort of an exchange of ideas, of knowledge that's very interesting for both parties. Another point of interest was especially for the entrepreneurs was create an informal network opportunity or opportunities. And especially as interpreter, you have to be a sort of a dating, matchmaking office to them. The informal approach is very important. And then offer a platform for commercial exposure and storytelling. I showed you the Van Eyck shop. There were a lot of banners and flags, logos all over the city that reminded visitors of the link between food and 15th century and linked to the entrepreneurs that were selling food stuff that were linked to the project. That's one of them. Marketing is very necessary to give especially creative entrepreneurs sort of a starting point of a connection with the project. And then create a platform also for storytelling. We had postcards in all the shops that were connecting the different producers with each other. And there was a little bit of food storytelling of each product and linked to 15th century Ghent. Then fertile soil is very important. I call it that way. You have to have a sort of a feeling with the local contemporary food vibe and keep the product unique to that place. We selected even the early adopters we were thinking of that were very necessary to give a kickoff to the project. And it was based on locality, quality, creativity, and especially sustainability. It doesn't have to be cool all the time, but just look for those four topics, and then it's a sort of a starting point for successful co-creation with them. And then it helps a lot, an iconic theme. The Mystic Lamb doesn't need a lot of explanation. A lot of people found the connection, and especially when we were looking at the food stuff that are even on the painting itself, that's very inspirational for a lot of the people we worked with. It takes time and effort, and especially to build up trust. You don't do it like that. It took more than a year to create all of those places, all of those cafes, restaurants, and food makers, craftsmen, to create new stuff and to link it to the Van Eyck team. And then last, a sustainable future for the project. We now see that cooperation between entrepreneurs and local city council services are made. It's made even stronger. New networking has found place. So a lot of people found each other through the project. And when in an act of preservation, we put heritage under a glass bell, it starts to suffocate and even rot. So only through the act of recreation, we can pass it on to next generations. It's something our ancestors did for centuries. And even when you look at your own family recipes, you think it's unchanged since your grandmothers passed it over to you, but we still do something new with it. We add new ingredients, we make it new, and that's the only way to give heritage a longer life. And food heritage has all the intrinsic qualities to live on. And we only have to cook and that's really taste, experience it. So that's my presentation. If you have questions, just shoot. I will stop sharing my presentation now. We don't hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now you do. Yes. Technical stuff. Thank you very much, Jeroen. As I pronounce it right?
Yeah, you pronounce it correctly.
Okay. Thank you very
much. Like the painter Jeroen Bosch.
Okay. Yes.
Uh,
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was really inspiring because I think that the people, wherever they travel around the world, first they think of is the food. We all must eat when we travel. Why not to eat something what is very authentic and what is very unique? And this project with the painter Van Eyck, actually it's a really nice example how to brand 15th century food, which can be directly connected with the storytelling, with the real story, real persons, and so on. So I think that a lot can help this slow food chain organization who works actually toward this heritage. So we have a couple of questions. I will be very brief. Yep. The first came from Max Dubravko-Fiatsko. We talk about how difficult it could be to include locals sometimes. How much are chiefs interested to join such events?
Yeah, that's what I was telling about later on in my presentation. You have to build up that trust, and that's very difficult because at first they all often think what's in it for me, especially chefs and entrepreneurs have a natural connection to economics and things like that. So you have to build up the trust. And in Ghent, it was very needful to have that ambassador, that local chef that was already from the start connected to the story and knew all the other chefs. So there was a sort of a basic trust. And then you have, as an interpreter, have to build on from there and have a very personal approach, look what they're making itself, and even ask them, why are you making the stuff you make nowadays? And then find links in it to all the information you have in your head, and make it very personal and unique. And that's for them very interesting then to co-create, because it's not all the same. You just make it relevant to each chef on its own. And that's the strength, I think, of the project in Ghent. And I really have to say again that the city of Ghent and the people over there of culture Ghent were a very necessary link to produce all the stuff underneath, the storytelling, the platforms, to make connection. Even if you don't have that, it's, as an interpreter, when you're not from the place itself, it's very difficult, I think, to do this.
Okay, we have a few questions more. I don't know, can we answer them all? I will go by the order. From Helena Vicic. What is the scale of this food offer, and is it easy to find this amount of ingredients for a local production?
Yeah, that's the fun part, let's call it that way. In the archaeological cesspools of 15th century, there are foodstuff that we know nowadays, but have a very own story behind it. And it's often new combination of tastes that make it different. And that makes it very interesting for food producers or chefs. Often there are some stuff like coriander seeds, for example. We nowadays in Belgium, it's something from the last decades. We think it comes from Middle Eastern cuisine to us nowadays. But in 15th century Ghent, it was a local produced herb. And that's very strange for a lot of people. So it's something you find in the shops nowadays, and you can connect it with our very traditionally based cuisine, but it went away for a couple of 100 years and now comes back into our food tradition. So it's looking for links in stuff we know nowadays, but weren't using in that way or something like that. So it's not that difficult to find all those ingredients.
Okay, thank you. Because if it's a little bit earlier food, we know that some of these herbs, they don't exist anymore or something like that. So the interpreters must find something to change the original flavor. We have, I think, for one more question for those Jeroen cannot answer. Please, you can type the same questions in the Interpret Europe conference dashboard. So you can tag him so he can see and he can answer to you. So for Per Sonvik, he asks, how is the reaction from the tourists and visitors?
Yeah, we had a lot of high hopes for it. Yeah, COVID, of course, made it, especially for the city of Ghent, a sort of, yeah, the year wasn't that festive that it was supposed to be, let's call it that way. But especially on the Seven Senses tour, I told you about, that was a tourist guided tour around the city. There we had also the connection with taste. And yeah, of course, when you have something with food related to a tour, everyone has the attention, especially, and not only that, everyone was very excited, especially when you try to use all the senses in it. And taste is one of them, but in combination with seeing things, hearing things, scenting things, and especially with food, you have the two, or even more. You have all of them. You can feel, you can scent, you can taste, you can see. It's all combined in one. So the tourists who made those tours, and especially it was Belgians then, of course, were very, it was very new for them to have them all in one experience, let's call it that way. So a lot of things to experiment, I think, with food and smell in interpretation, but that's why we have the gastronomic team in Interpret Europe, and you will get to know us later on this day with the thematic table. So if you want to go further into it, I invite you all to the thematic table at 4 this later afternoon.
Okay, I would like to thank you, Jeroen, for being a part of this year's Interpret Europe conference 2021. Once again, thanks for the participation and for the inspiring presentation for all